Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is a talk about preference polls, proper names, and pronunciation dictionaries. The market for pronunciation dictionaries for English is big enough to support 3 competing titles. So the oldest one is what used to be called the Daniel Jones EPD, English Pronouncing Dictionary, now taken over by Cambridge and called the Cambridge English Pronouncing Dictionary, edited by Peter Roach and James Hartman and Jane Setter, whose name you will recognise. However, there is also my own Longman Pronunciation Dictionary, which appeared nearly 20 years ago for the first time, so much newer, but I have a lot of new ideas compared with EPD as it then was, and I'm gratified, flattered to see that EPD has now taken over most of my new ideas, and you can find them in both. There is also one third one, the Oxford Dictionary of Pronunciation, about which the less we say the better. Right, why do we want to use a specialist pronunciation dictionary? What can it offer us that isn't found in a general dictionary? Well, various things. Mainly because they're always written by phoneticians, by specialists in phonetics, you get more authentic and more up-to-date information about pronunciation and about phonetics. And indeed you will find explanations of phonetic terms, explanations of phonetic concepts, which you won't in general dictionaries. They also give you much more information about variability. Ordinary dictionaries tend to give you just one pronunciation for each head word, occasionally 2, because you're not interested really in the other possibilities. Specialist dictionaries typically give you rather more information to reflect the actual state of the language, in which there is quite a bit of variability. The pronunciation dictionaries that I showed you now all give both British and American versions for each head word. So this is useful information if you want to know about more than one variety of English. In particular, pronunciation dictionaries tell you about proper names. They include names of people, names of places, names of products, names of characters in fiction, names of characters in mythology, names of commercial companies, names of products, names of brands. All of these things may well not be in general dictionaries, and yet they're part of the language, part of the supply of words that we all use. And when I was revising my Longman Pronunciation Dictionary for this new 3rd edition that has just come out, I of course had to add a lot of new words. Some of these are general words, some of them are specialist words, some of them are names. So there's just a little list of words to do with the internet, the web, that I've added this time round. They weren't in the previous edition. I'm sure you know all of these words. Bebo, networking site. Blogging, what I do every day. Chat room, where you go and exchange opinions about things. Digicam, digital camcorder, digital camera. eBay, auction site. Google, which we all use now to find web pages. An iPod, which you may have to listen on your own. Phishing expeditions, trying to deceive you by giving your bank details to crooks who will misuse them. Podcasts from the radio, you can download a program and listen to it at your leisure on your iPod. To unsubscribe, well, we all have the verb to subscribe, but now with listservs and so on, you can unsubscribe to cease being a subscriber. Wi-Fi, which is what I was using this morning with my computer to show you BBC One as it happened through the UCL Wi-Fi system, Ronet, and the ability we now have to watch live programs on the web. Wikipedia, which is where you look things up using caution. I always advise my students to be careful using Wikipedia because it used to have a lot of errors. It's getting much, much better, but it's still not perfect. Well, here's some more special words. Who knows what an ASBO is? That's a specifically British term. Yes, perhaps would you like to explain to everybody what an ASBO is? Yes, why not?
It stands for Antisocial Behaviour Order.
Thank you, an antisocial behaviour order. It's a kind of punishment that magistrates can impose on someone. Instead of sending them to prison or fining them, they can put this order which essentially says you must behave yourself, you mustn't go around doing what you've been doing. Yes, Asperger's, disease or condition. Botox, people use it to, yes. Burqa is a kind of garment that covers a great deal of you except the eyes. Chav is a newly popular British term for an urban working class male, essentially, not always male. They tend to call them chavettes if they're female. Fashionista, someone who's interested in fashions. Hijab, another kind of Muslim dress. A latte, which you could buy at a cafe. And how do we pronounce this word? Tea. I forget the tone. It's tone 4. Qi. A Chinese word, yes. But in English we just call it qi. Of course, meaning energy in Chinese medicine. So. Gets worse, doesn't it? Proper names. What do we do with all these proper names? Yes, well, the first one is a good example of the problem with proper names, where, in a sense, we don't really want to know what it is in the original language. We want to know how to pronounce it in English. I like to give not only the English, but also the original pronunciation in the language, if I can find out. So you can see my entry for, well, we call it Al-Qaeda, usually in English, though you can also hear it called various other things like Al-Qaeda, 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 and so on. And, well, there's the Arabic pronunciation, which is more or less Al-Qaeda. We've got a speaker of Arabic who can do it in an authentic way for us, please. Yes.
Al-Qaeda.
Again?
Al-Qaeda.
Okay. So, there you are. There's the Arabic transcription with this "ah" in the middle, "ain," which non-Arabic speakers find rather difficult usually. Well, now, Beyoncé is what she's usually called in English, but I have just discovered that she prefers to be called Beyoncé. So what you do is up to you. The singer Condoleezza Rice, Federer, the tennis champion, little supermarket chain, Merkel, the German Chancellor, Harry Potter, author J.K. Well, it's Rowling, yes, just like rolling along, although the spelling is ambiguous because it could mean Rowling, but it isn't, it's Rowling. Archbishop Sentamu, Archbishop of York, high up in the Anglican Church. He's Ugandan in origin, and he says the way to remember his name is that there is a right mu, a left mu, and a centre mu. That's what he is. Otherwise, people seeing that spelling think it might be Centamu, but no. Alan Titchmarsh, a popular television producer, presenting. All right, well, so much for that. What I really mainly want to talk about today is preference poles. You see, when I came to first compile this dictionary, I was confronted by a problem. Whenever there is a word with several different pronunciations, even I know has more than one pronunciation, the problem is to decide which pronunciation I should prioritize, which one I should recommend to the EFL user and to anybody else who wants my advice. For example, some people say to contribute, other people say to contribute. Which should I recommend? Some people call a striped black and white animal a zebra, others call it a zebra. Well, I could always follow my own pronunciation, but maybe I am not representative. So what I did was, for a number of words of this type, several hundred in fact now, conduct a poll, an opinion poll, where I asked people to vote which they prefer of two or more pronunciations. Well, we had 3 that were in this 2nd edition, so 3 that, if you like, I inherited from previous editions. But for the new edition, this year, we've added 2 new ones, one conducted by my colleague Bert Vaux of the University of Harvard. He's now moved to the University of Cambridge, by the way. But he ran this from Harvard over a period of 2 years, and people could vote online. So he got a very large number of responses, 11,000, all from Americans, so it's about American English. But this very large sample size means that the results are very robust in statistical terms. I did one for British English, or rather Pearson Education did it for me, much quicker, quick and dirty, as we say in the trade, only lasted about 6 weeks, and so had many fewer responses, but nevertheless we got over 800 responses, and again that's quite a respectable sample size. Well, this enables us to see what people prefer. Sometimes the results are overwhelming in one direction or the other, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're pretty finely balanced. Sometimes they show us that there's a change taking place, because when we compare the older people's responses with the younger people's responses, we get different effects, different results. Others we find almost exactly the same for all age groups. So where it's the same for all age groups, the language must be in a steady state situation with more than one possibility, which is interesting that that should exist. Where, on the other hand, we have a difference for the different age groups, we can infer that the language is changing, things are gradually moving from one position to another. So, why we've got the wrong vowels there, I don't know. What should I do something about that? And to all you who use PowerPoint, I'm sure you can correct things on the hoof like this. And when, for some reason, the computer you're attached to hasn't got exactly what you want, can't get these highlighted. There we are. When the computer you're on hasn't got what you want, then you can instantly convert it to what you intended in the first place. It's a great hazard of using phonetic symbols in PowerPoint that you have to be sure that the entire system is the one that you're used to. That's because this was an old slide which I did using a non-Unicode font. It's dangerous to use non-Unicode fonts because they can sometimes display garbage. So for about the last year or two, I've been strongly encouraging everybody to use Unicode fonts. Unfortunately, I didn't follow my own advice with this old slide, and so it came out wrong. Anyhow, this is the kind of question you might get. Which do you prefer for the first vowel sound in dissect or dissect? Would you like to vote about this? Would it be better as dissect or as dissect? Who votes for D? Put your hand up. Who votes for die? Yes, well, a majority for D. But did you notice what the native speakers voted for? No. Right, just native speakers, please vote again. First for D, dissect. 1, 2. Who votes for dissect, native speakers? A majority. And that's what we find. It's interesting, isn't it? There's a graph, or if you prefer a graph, showing the relationship between the speaker's age and their preference. So you can see that for the older people, it was about 2/3 in favour of dissect, but the younger we get, the more overwhelming is the preference for die. Till by the time we get to the youngest speakers, it's 95% in favour of dissect. This is interesting because the spelling certainly suggests dissect, and that's certainly why you mostly voted for dissect. So it just shows how perversely native speakers can go against the spelling, and this is a sound change that goes against the spelling. So that people like me who say dissect are now becoming very old-fashioned. Dissect is clearly the way things are going. This is happening again. I don't know why this should be, because it worked all right this morning. That's what people always say, isn't it? All we have to do is impose a proper font on it, and it's beautiful. And again, I do recommend anybody who uses PowerPoint to be able to do it quickly like that so as not to interrupt things too much in the class. Okay, what's the vowel in the last syllable of... Well now, is it called a hurricane? Or is it called a hurricane? What do you think the results will be for that? Native speakers vote. Who votes for hurricane? 1, 2, 3. Who votes for hurricane? 1, 2, 3. Just about the same. Perhaps slightly more for hurricane. This is another one that's changing. There you can see that older speakers go for hurricane by 3 to 1, 70-odd% go for hurricane. But the younger you are, the more likely you are to prefer hurricane. And the youngest group are 4/5 in favour of hurricane. So this is different. This is a spelling pronunciation coming in. The spelling suggests cane, and that has presumably been one of the factors that has led people to move away from the traditional pronunciation, hurricane, in the direction of the one that agrees with the spelling, hurricane. But this is what we find, that you can't make any general statement about trends very often, because you have one word that does one thing, dissect goes against the spelling, and other words that follow. Hurricane follows the spelling. Here's another example of a word that has different pronunciations, but in this case we find no difference between different age groups. What we do find is difference between British and America. The question is, where does the stress go? Is it an adult or is it an adult? Now, both pronunciations are found on both sides of the Atlantic, but as you can see from those pie charts, as they're called, pie charts, on the British side, overwhelmingly people prefer adult. On the American side, overwhelmingly people prefer adult. Though I suppose the good news for the EFL learner is that both pronunciations are used on both sides of the Atlantic, so it doesn't matter. It's not a disaster if in Britain you speak of an adult or if in America you speak of an adult, because in both places there's a minority who do that. So this is an example of no age effect. Here's another one which, somewhat to my surprise, showed no age effect. What belongs to me is mine. What belongs to you is, well, 75% say yours, they like better, 25% prefer yours. Because the people answering the questionnaire were not specialist phoneticians, I couldn't just use phonetic symbols with them. I had to ask about whether it rhymes or sounds the same as some other word, or use an ad hoc respelling system. So what I asked them here is whether it sounds the same or different as YAWS, which is the name of a tropical disease, YAWS. And that immediately rules out the Scots, for example. Now, Scottish people actually mostly say yours. So they're not going to follow this English trend of moving from yours to yours. And we have to remember that with all these things about British English, it's not just English, it also includes the Welsh and the Scots, not the Irish, because they're not British, and it certainly doesn't limit it to received pronunciation or even to something vaguer and bigger like General British that Jack Winsor-Lewis speaks of. We have to bear that in mind when interpreting these figures and results. Okay. One of the things that struck me when I first compiled the first edition of LPV was that I seem to hear an awful lot of people say careless, useless, pointless, but the only thing given in dictionaries at that time was careless, useless, pointless. So, well, I stuck my neck out and I said, I think that's no longer the mainstream pronunciation. I think we ought to prioritize less for this ending. So I was sort of relieved and gratified when I found that the people in the survey felt the same way. And indeed, 3/4 of people answered preferring less in careless and similar words. I did this twice, for the second edition in 1998 and for the new third edition last year. And you see that the figures are really much the same. So this suggests we're not even changing very much. We've got to a steady state. And Daniel Jones's old idea that everybody says less is just no longer in touch with reality, however true it may have been 100 years ago. And so to dictionaries like the Collins Dictionary that still prioritize, still only give this in these words, I think it's time we told them to wake up and smell the coffee and be aware that things have changed. Now, what's the adjective compared with mischief? Mischief, naughty behaviour, a mischievous child, a mischievous child, a mischievous child. Well, you can see the results that I found there. The British one, the pale, no, the darker blue represents mischievous. That's what I say, and that's what I was taught as the correct pronunciation when I was at school. Mischievous, 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 stressed on the miss. But an awful lot of people say mischievous, stressing the second syllable. That's the paler blue thing there, mischievous. Is it? No, it isn't. That's the palest of all, the 15%. Because people who stress the chieve now seem to want to put an extra ink in, making it mischievous. Somehow that fits the pattern of English more happily than mischievous does. So we've got these three competing pronunciations. The American survey took stress on the chieve, I think, for granted, and just asked whether or not you have an extra ink there. Mischievous, mischievous. Well, older people always think that younger people are making a mess of the language, can't speak it properly. These are cases in point. Here's the one about contribute or contribute. Just go back to full screen. And what do we see here? Older speakers, like me, we prefer contribute. Contribute. And in my age group, only 15% voted for contribute. Everybody else voted for contribute. But you see, I'm old-fashioned because for the young, it's about equal. Slightly more than half prefer contribute. And this is a word where, to some extent, teachers of English and so on have banged away that their pupils must pronounce it correctly as contribute. So there's a certain resistance to contribute. Nevertheless, that resistance is unsuccessful and contribute clearly seems to be taking over. Same thing applies in distribute and distribute. Here, if we compare the 1988 results, with the 2007 results, you can see that there is a change, so the language is undergoing a change. Yes, what's that continent called? Here you're all trying it out. Is it Asia or is it Asia? Well, again, you can see me showing my age because I say Asia, like most people of my age group. Asia, Asia, Asia. But the young now prefer Asia, Asia, Asia. I repeat that the good news for EFL is that it doesn't matter which you say, because we've been doing the same as native speakers, whichever you choose. I can't imagine why the font has changed itself overnight. It all worked beautifully. Yes, where's the stress in this word? Is it applicable or applicable? Well, here you can see that most people in Britain voted for applicable. Most people in America voted for applicable. There doesn't seem to be much change. There's slight differences over the different years, because this is a word I had in 3 separate surveys at 10-year intervals. So we're pretty much in a steady state, slight move perhaps towards applicable in Britain, but a clear big difference between British and American. So what can we say about general trends? Many of the words in this survey are sort of individual words. They're not representative of groups of words. But there are some that are. And one of the interesting questions is the situation with words that traditionally began tip. Words like tune, tutor, Tuesday, student, and so on, where we have a strong stressed syllable following it. When I was a boy, it was considered very vulgar to say tune or tutor. And people like me wouldn't have been caught dead doing so. Things have changed. There was a very interesting survey that I mentioned this morning, carried out by a Norwegian PhD candidate called Hanny Stahl, who took 30 different television newsreaders, men, 30 women, 1/3 of them from BBC, 1/3 from ITV, 1/3 from Sky News, and took an hour of each person's speech. It was a very big sample in that sense, and went through checking for this kind of thing. And she found that half of the time they were saying ch in these words, Tuesday, tune, and so on, rather than Tuesday and tune. And she therefore says, and I agree with her, that we have to regard this as now part of received pronunciation. So I used to have a special mark in LPD saying, well, this exists, but it's not standard. What I've done on the latest edition is remove that remark, that little mark everywhere, so this is now just a variant that you can use if you prefer. Coalescence assimilations, we call it, or non-coalescence. And you can see that for the younger speakers, 2/3 of them choose that pronunciation, choose tune over tune. And similarly with the voiced sounds, where we traditionally had d as enduring, duty, reduce, endure. The new pronunciation has j, giving us during, duty, reduce, endure. So the reduce is just like orange juice, reduce. Whereas for people like me, orange juice is different from to reduce. Okay. So that difference is clearly going from English, which will be easier for forthcoming generations of learners, I suppose. And there is the graph. We haven't got there yet, but we're moving gradually, as you can see, towards j. The rest of this graph is about the vowel, which is another issue entirely. Now, this is a word which several people wrote to me about, because in the previous edition I gave priority to the pronunciation tinnitus, because people I knew who had the condition called it tinnitus, so that's why I put it in. But other people then wrote to me saying, come on, everybody calls it tinnitus. What do? I conduct a poll. And what do we find? That although for the oldest group, the vast majority say tinnitus, only, 12% voted for tinnitus among the oldest group. The younger we get, the more people vote for tinnitus. So they're both around. Tinnitus is still a minority pronunciation, but clearly one that is growing fast and may quite possibly take over. I don't think this will happen in American English, though it might. We haven't had a survey of American. I looked up the website of the American Tinnitus Institute, and the very first thing it says is how to pronounce this word. We call it tinnitus, and that's what they recommend. I don't know how much influence they have, but anyhow. Another reason why I put in tinnitus is the fact that I'm a classics graduate. My first degree was in Latin and Greek in classics. And I can't escape the knowledge that the second vowel in this word is long in Latin, and therefore ought to produce I in English. The Latin stress rule, you know, if you have a long vowel in the penultimate, it gets stressed, so tinnitus. If it's short, you get stress earlier, so tinnitus. So it's all to do, the stress placement is to do with the Latin vowel length. You don't need to know this, but it's a historical fact. And because I'm a classicist, I was prejudiced, perhaps wrongly, in favour of tinnitus. Okay, I thought we'd better have a look and see some of the things that are new in the new edition of the Long Pronunciation Dictionary. I don't want to make this too much a kind of advertising session around the new edition, but obviously I feel very proud of it, and I'm grateful to my publishers for being so energetic and proactive in suggesting new things that we could do, and which we have indeed done. So the first thing is, well, when the time came for a new edition, I don't know if you've ever worked with publishers. What happens if you say, let's have a new edition? They say, well, we must look at our budget, we'll get back to you, and nothing happens. And then, suddenly, they say, oh, by the way, we've decided to do a new edition. Could we have it, please, in 6 months' time? And could you add 5,000 new words, and could you conduct a new survey? And of course, it's difficult to do that within the time available. So I straight away said, I cannot do 5,000 new head words. I could perhaps do 3,000, and I did. And we did manage to do a new survey. It was very hard work for that 6 months between the moment when the publisher said go ahead and the deadline by which they must have everything, because it has to go to the printers, and then it has to be bound, and then it has to be shipped all over the world. They need 6 weeks from publication date, possible, in Hong Kong, where it's going to be printed, or China, somewhere where it's printed, to get to Argentina, so that the whole world can have the same publication. Anyhow, how do I get 3,000 new head words? Well, obviously I have to check about new words I've heard. Fortunately, I always walk around with a piece of paper in my pocket. And on my piece of paper, I jot down words that I hear that we haven't got already in the dictionary, and indeed pronunciations that we haven't got. And later when I get home, I transfer these to the computer. So I've always got a list of words that I think ought to be added next time, or pronunciations that ought to be added next time. Plus, of course, I also go through existing dictionaries. All dictionaries, you may not know this, all dictionaries are cannibalistic. I don't know, they look at other dictionaries and they say, oh, look, yes, we ought to have that because that's in Collins or because that's in the Oxford Dictionary. And everybody, therefore, discovers these new words and everybody has noticed. But yes, mainly that's because I keep my ears open all the time. We've got this new poll, I told you about that already. The other big thing that we've got now is the CD-ROM. If you look at the new edition, you can see my smiling face on the front on the CD here. And indeed, if you look at the CD, there again is my smiling face. You wouldn't believe what a lot of work it is to get those photographs. I had to go to a photographer's studio, you know, with sort of white behind and reflections. And I had to stand there with my legs apart, with my legs together, wearing a tie, not wearing a tie, wearing a jacket, not wearing a jacket, holding the book, not holding the book. 2 hours, I should think, I spent there posing in one way after another. And then the graphic designer chooses the one that they will use. Which brings me on to the point of graphic designers. Authors like me tend to think that graphic design is, well, you know, sort of luxury, something that's not very important at all. But I can see that the general appearance of a book is enormously important. And if I now look back at the first edition 20 years ago, it looks old-fashioned, it looks ridiculously old-fashioned. You know, if I look at the new one, yes, that's a book of today. And that's because of graphic design. So we mustn't knock it, as we say. So you see, that's the results. And I hope you like me holding the book with a tie. You can't see whether my legs are together or not, but anyhow, smiling bravely. What this tells us, though, is about the CD. Now, I must be honest and say that the Cambridge EPD did get a CD-ROM before we did. And it was because they got a CD-ROM that I think Longman essentially decided we must now have one too. And that's why we went into this rapid production mode. The consequence, I'm glad to say, is that our CD-ROM is much better. Now this is how it works, you see. This is capitalism in action. There was the original EPD. Then Longman came out with my Longman pronunciation dictionary, which was much better than the So EPD had to make a lot of changes. It got a new editor, it updated itself in many ways, and it became nearly as good. But we wanted to stay ahead, so we had to add some new things. And Cambridge wanted to catch up and overtake us, which they actually did by having a CD. Now we've overtaken stuff. The long one is now the best. So, let's see if we can actually get this all working. I'm going to do something that's very dangerous in a live lecture, and that's to try and operate some online software. Okay, this is what it looks like on the CD. You can load the whole stuff onto your computer, of course, which is what I've done. You don't actually have to run it off the CD. And first of all, yes, it includes all the dictionary. So the entire text of the dictionary, you can bring it up on your computer and you can arrange it so that it comes in a little box when you're writing things and so on. And
chair.
You can listen. That was the British. And
chair.
That's the American. Oh. Now, what I can't do at the moment, because I haven't got a mic with me, is record my own voice there, which is a thing you can do. You see, with each, every time you see that microphone, well, you can play the British pronunciation, you can play the American pronunciation, you can record your own sound, then you can play your own sound. So you have to make your own judgment whether you've done it well or badly. Okay. Well, if we've had chair, let's have table. So we type it in. And then
table.
Yes! Table. Let's listen again.
Table.
That's British and
table.
That's American. They sound the same.
Table linen. Table manners. Table talk. Table tennis. Table wine.
And so on. actually listen. That's something that users said they wanted to be able to do. You can also search by sound. Let's see if we can go back to chair like this. We have to find the phonetic symbols. There's ch, and here is air. Let's see what happens. Okay, we've got a result.
chair,
There we are. So you can search for words by their sounds, provided you know phonetic transcription. That's called sound search. Now, as well as the pronunciation dictionary, there's what we call the pronunciation guide. These are the phonetic explanations of technical terms. What's an affricate? So there's a little article telling you what an affricate is and explaining it with examples. We have what we call a self-study lab. Which I hope will work. Yes, we have to choose British or American. Okay, now here's an exercise in deciding what's the right pronunciation. Can you see the first word? You might think it's instayed, or instead, or insteed, or instead, or instirred. And you have to click appropriately. Well, let's get it wrong. Let's think it's instayed. And now we look for the answers. Check answers. Oh no. And tell us what the right answer is. It's instead. And now it's correct. The others are wrong because we haven't done them yet. Okay, so that's the self-study lab. You can bring up page after page after page of this stuff and practice. Practicing transcription, really. This, I think, is perhaps the biggest source of error for those who are good, fluent speakers of English, who are not sure how to pronounce a particular word, because the spelling doesn't tell you clearly. So this is for you to drill yourself on that. Now, anybody who's a teacher, I turn to the Teachers Resource Centre, because I hope it works. Yes, it does. And you find these worksheets, which you can then print out for your class. And this is an exercise in reading phonetic transcription aloud. So you can work out what does this represent and work out how the word is spelt. So the first one I'm sure you can all read is coffee. Okay, like coffee that you drink. And the second one says surely, also pronounced surely, but more commonly nowadays, surely. And the third one is certain, and then inquest, and so on. So that's an exercise that you can use in the class, and there are hundreds of these worksheets available on the CD-ROM. And the last thing is the preference polls that we've been discussing. There's, you can see, contribute, but one at the top is an interesting one, which is for American English, which is the word congratulate. Now, in Britain, everybody says it with a voiceless ch, or perhaps ch in the middle. So either rather careful, congratulate, or more usually congratulate. What's happening in American English is very strange, because they're more and more saying congratulate. Congratulations, I congratulate you. Voicing. Indeed, I now give that as the first choice for American English. That's after the double line. Because our opinion poll showed, we'll got that. And look at this. There is our congratulate. You can see that for the oldest Americans, everybody prefers congratulate. But the younger you are, the more likely you are to prefer congratulate in American English. Now, these are not actual statistics about what people pronounce. They're statistics about what people prefer. because we couldn't actually conduct a survey, recording people, some great spoken corpus and going through it. One of the reasons for that is that it's actually quite rare for any given word like this to be used in writing speech. I mean, you have to have a lot of hours of recorded material to be sure of getting more than 1 or 2 cases of this word. So we asked people, which do you prefer? And that at least enables us to report these findings, which are what they think they say, even if they're not exactly always what they actually do say. So there is congratulate. And with that, I'm coming to the end of the formal lecture, and I congratulate you on listening to it all. Thanks.